I welcome everyone who has joined us for today's virtual roundtable discussing Russia's war against Ukraine, implications for democracies and democracy assistance in Moldova, Georgia, Armenia, in the EaP, Eastern Partnership region, as it's referred to, convened by International Institute for Democracy and Electoral Assistance. My name is Nana Kalandadze. I'm a program manager at the International Ideas Europe program, and I will moderate this discussion. Few words on the technical rules of our meeting. So participants joining to follow and contribute with questions or reflections, please use the message box. We'll follow it, we'll note them down, and if any questions, we'll forward them to our panelists who will be able to address them later in the discussion. We're not, unfortunately, able to take in questions through voice from our audience. We have had about 300 participants expressing their interest to join. We now have about 100 listening in, and so this has shown a great interest among our audiences in Europe and also globally, obviously, for the given the situation that the region is in. We are recording the meeting, and it is going to be available on our YouTube channel later. We have multiple language channels. The panelists will speak in English, and you should be able to access interpretation into Armenian, Georgian, Romanian, Russian, and Ukrainian. And the program and the short bios of our speakers are available through this link that we have just shared in the chat box. Now, let me just say that International IDEA convenes regular dialogues and produces knowledge resources on to support democratic reforms in a variety of thematic fields. And we regularly issue global and regional reports on the state of democracy. Now, this event aims to improve our collective understanding of the implications of this war on democracies in the region, the immediate and longer effects on democratic reform processes in Moldova, Georgia, and Armenia, the three countries that continue to build liberal democracies in the region, and also we'll be discussing what responses may we want to consider as national and international democracy assistance providers. I would like to now give floor to our Secretary General, Mr. Kevin Casas-Zamora. Let me just say a few words about Mr. Casas-Zamora. He brings more than 25 years of experience in supporting and fostering democratic reforms at national and international levels in his former capacity as a high-level public official in his home country, Costa Rica, and through international intergovernmental organizations. And as the Secretary General of International IDEA, he has taken a strong lead in galvanizing increased attention to democracy support and multilateral action on this subject through IDEA's own work, but also through joint work with our international partners. Kevin, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Nana, and good afternoon, good morning to you all. Good morning from this part of the world. And thank you all for being here. The past 4 weeks have been dire for Europe and indeed for the world. It will soon be a month since Russia attacked Ukraine and continues to wage its bloody war, sparing no one, including children sheltering in underground basements, those in maternity wards and in hospitals. In these days, more than ever in recent history, we have become witness to how an unchecked leader for decades trampling fundamental rights and freedoms of his own citizens can undermine peace and stability beyond his borders. Belarus, under the crippling regime of Alexander Lukashenko, has also been drawn into this terrible war of aggression against the will of his people. Against this backdrop, we wanted to convene today and discuss how democracies in Armenia, Georgia, and Moldova can be made more resilient and deepen further as a result of this crisis. Some may ask whether this is an opportune time for such a discussion, or whether democracy-related discussions should give way to those related to building better defense systems and seeking effective security guarantees at all costs. Let me reiterate why this is indeed the time to act to defend and deepen democratic institutions. Yes, it is true that democracy within a country does not guarantee non-aggression from the neighbors, as the Ukrainian case clearly illustrates. But it is only in a democracy that societies can build social cohesion and trust that enables them to successfully persevere in a crisis. It is only in democracies that societies can reconcile deep divisions through inclusive participation and dialogue. It is only in a democracy that citizens maintain control over their governments and are therefore able to retain and demonstrate confidence in their institutions, again, as the Ukrainian case demonstrates in these terrible days. This is a pivotal time to renew the fight for expanding and deepening democracies in this region and beyond. It is pivotal because never before the values that democracies embody and carry forward have been so clearly contrasted with those that authoritarians use to survive. This is a struggle of truth versus falsehood, a struggle of free speech versus fearful silence. This is a crucial moment for incumbent governments and citizens in the region, a moment which is arguably as decisive as the critical years between 1989 and 1991. Just days after the start of Russia's invasion of Ukraine and following Ukraine's urgent application for membership of the EU, Georgia and Moldova also sent their applications. These applications once again commit these countries and their incumbent governments to invest in democracy, where human rights and the rule of law are protected, and where state power is constrained by democratic checks and balances. If there is a positive fallout emerging from this devastating war on the rest of the region, this could be it. But what we would like to hear today, and indeed learn about from our prominent speakers with long experiences of building their democracies, is what other impact to their democracies can the war in Ukraine have in the immediate future and beyond? And how should national and international democracy support actors respond in the face of those challenges? There are many questions open before us. For example, could this war and its fallout on the region's economies unravel social and political instabilities? If so, what internal democratic mechanisms can mitigate those risks? Will the ruling elites and executive governments witnessing Russia's ruthless actions against Ukraine find the resolve to continue building pluralistic democratic systems which require that they submit themselves to scrutiny of the opposition and civil society? Or alternatively, will they, using the argument of war at the doorstep, increasingly resort to majoritarian or even authoritarian methods of governance? Both options are open. Will civic groups find it harder to fight for independent media and their ability to check government actions? What can domestic and international democracy watchdogs and assistance providers do to help find right solutions to this challenge? Those are some of the issues that we will be exploring in the course of this conversation. The thread that connects all those issues is a sense of agency, that it is our collective responsibility to make sure that democratic institutions stay on track in the region. Inertia alone won't cut it, certainly not in the face of the current threats. International IDEA was established in 1995, shortly after the fall of the Berlin Wall and the end of the apartheid regime. At the time, we consider our mission to assist countries embarking on transitions towards democracy in the 1990s as a linear path leading to an ever more democratic world. Well, Russia's invasion of Ukraine has confounded that view once and for all. What has not changed is our willingness to continue to support democracy despite the setbacks, both now and in the future. That mission is much more important now than it was in 1995. It is our shared responsibility to make sure that this authoritarian assault on democracy fails. And you can be sure that IDEA will do its part alongside you in this historical struggle. Thank you very much.
Kevin, thank you so much. I think the aims of the roundtable have been clearly laid out. And we will go now straight into the panel presentations and the discussions. I'd like to now introduce Mr. Igor Botson. Few words about his profile and what he brings along with his experience. So since 1999, Mr. Botson is executive director of the Association for Participatory Democracy in Moldova, one of the leading NGOs advocating for democratic reforms across a range of reform areas. And Mr. Botson has led multiple civil society advocacy and monitoring efforts to foster implementation of Moldova EU association agreements. If anyone in Moldova has a hand on the pulse of democracy, it is him. Mr. Botson, I invite you to take the floor and talk to us about those 2-3 key questions that Kevin has outlined.
Thank you very much. I'm very honored to have this opportunity to participate in this discussion. And I'll share with you the screen in order to present my my slides and commenting on what's going on in Moldova in these very, very sad days after the aggression of Russia against Ukraine. If I'm okay. Okay, I hope you are seeing, yeah?
Yes, we see
okay, the structure of my speech was done in accordance with your suggestion to answer the key question, how the war affects democracy in Moldova. I will speak about Moldova, and first of all, I would like to mention the immediate effects of this aggression of Russia against Ukraine. And you understand that Moldova is a Ukraine neighbor, and we have on the territory of Moldova separatist enclave controlled by Russia, and recently Council of Europe Parliamentary Assembly recognized after 30 years that de facto Transnistria is an occupied territory by Russia. So for all of us here in Moldova, the events in Ukraine are of very, very high interest. So let's go on. Immediate effects. War in Ukraine is deepening the cleavages in the Moldovan society, which is divided. It's divided on the so-called integration criteria, pro-European and Eurasian integration. And after the war started, we are feeling that the public opinion in our society is became extremely polarized. And other effects are, of course, the burst of prices provoked by Russia's war against Ukraine and its energetic policy, which undermines the political stability in Moldova. And we understand this very well. We understand that it's not by chance that in the summer of previous year, Russia stopped its supply, gas supply on European market, and so on, insisting that it needs long-term contracts and so on and so on. And in this way, it provoked this price rises, which Moldovan government just felt immediately. So despite the introduction of emergency state in Moldova, the pro-Russian and pro-oligarchic political forces in Moldova are very, very active and are organizing protests against the government. And their message is that in this way, they are trying to protect the interest of common people and fighting against the government, which is a signal that these political forces are engaged in this political war here in Moldova. And as a result, citizen support for pro-European ruling party is decreasing, while the support for pro-Russian and oligarchic political forces is increasing. And these are, as I mentioned, the immediate effect. Now, in this situation, about government's resilience. The good thing is that the central power remains consolidated, being controlled by a single pro-European political force, Action and Solidarity Party. Parliament is in its first year of 4 years term mandate, while President Maia Sandu is on her second year. So they have enough time to administrate this crisis and to try to improve the situation, being sure that the next electoral cycle could remain let's say so, under the control of pro-European forces, but it will take a lot of efforts in order to succeed in this fight. The ruling party is deeply involved in reforming the justice and fighting corruption, being supported by the development partner, United States and European Union, but all these reforms are harshly contested by pro-Russian and oligarchic parties, and this is a huge danger in succeeding in reforming the justice institution and anti-corruption institution as well. And another danger for us is that due to non-participatory political culture, the democracy in Moldova, we call it imitative one. This notion of imitative democracy was elaborated by Romanian scientist Vladimir Paste and by Russian political scientist Dmitry Furman, meaning that in our society, post-Soviet society, we are borrowing beautiful Western forms for institutions and so on, but unfortunately, the lack of democratic experience just make these institutions very, very weak. And in this situation, the common people is more oriented towards those political forces who could ensure better material or living standards, cheaper gas, fuel, food prices, and so on. And this is the huge problem for us in this very, very complicated situation. And I would like to share with you my, I consider it's best formula for democracy. Democracy is institutionalized liberty. So the resilience of institutions, it's the main problem we should think nowadays in this very, very complicated situation. So discussing about the immediate impact, I would like now to pass to the second part of my speech. What are the particular vulnerabilities for the democratic process in Moldova? So the main vulnerabilities are information space is mostly controlled by Russia in Moldova, unfortunately. TV station, internet portals, and so on and so on. And from this viewpoint, for sure, Moldova is a victim of Russian propaganda. The so-called fifth column, according to the recent definition of Mr. P, is very strong and well equipped here in Moldova, comprising pro-Russian and oligarchic political parties, media holdings, and network of experts, bloggers. Unfortunately, Orthodox Church and all these institutions and agents are controlled by Russian political circles, and they are extremely active nowadays, trying to somehow to justify the Russia invasion in Ukraine and to just spread in society a kind of negative attitude towards Ukrainian refugees which are leaving their country for Moldova and other European countries. Propaganda and fifth columns is exploiting the problem provoked by the war, price explosion, refugee pressure, and I mentioned, and of course the pressure on budget and economy of Moldova, and all these things are debated in society, are spread through their network, and so on and so on. The main goal is the destabilization of political situation, provoking kind of governmental crisis and eventually early parliamentary elections, and blocking reform and changing the country development paradigm. For example, I can mention that one of the leading oppositional party, Party of Socialists, is praising Lukashenko's regime, but at the same time, when authorities undertake measures in order to stop propaganda, they are screaming and invoking democratic processes which should be observed. So the eventual change of paradigm, democratic paradigm, I mean European integration, of course, could be changed if Russia succeeds in its aggression against Ukraine. In this situation, I mentioned immediately after the aggression against Ukraine, the parliament adopted the declaration and introduced the emergency state in the Republic of Moldova. Despite the provisions of these documents, opposition are organizing protest meetings against the government. Despite that this is prohibited according to legislation. And I should say that state institutions as intelligence service, audiovisual council are trying in a very, very modest way to combat propaganda by blocking internet resources and fining TV stations which are associated with these pro-Russian political forces. Now, what is the impact I would like to share with you? You have before you the recent survey results. Citizens of Moldova were asked who is to be blamed for the outbreak of war in Ukraine, and this is extremely interesting. We have about 30% of Moldovans saying that Russia, or rather Russia than Ukraine, about 20% saying Ukraine rather than Russia. And what is very interesting, we have about 30% of people who refuse to reply, or they say they don't know. And for sure, this is the result of the propaganda. And we understand that this undetermined segment of population is the goal of propaganda. In this way, using their instrument, they want to incline the balance towards the support of Russia aggression against Ukraine. Now, we understand that one of the main enemy of the democracy in this situation is uncertainty. Apart from the evolution of the war in Ukraine, one can guess that Russia intends to use its Transnistrian separatist enclave for maintaining its influence on Moldova. And we don't know what is to be expected. Federalization project for Moldova, pretext for invasion, eventual invasion in Moldova. We were amazed to see Russian embassy in Moldova spreading information and asking citizens of Moldova to report if eventually their rights are infringed in Moldova. And we understand that this is a kind of provocation, and authorities and public and civil society institutions had to interfere and to give a reply that in Moldova we are building a democratic country, and all citizens of Moldova, they enjoy the same right. Nobody is in Moldova under the pressure from linguistic viewpoint or other viewpoints, and so on and so on. But the weaknesses of Moldova is that Moldova is dependent on gas supply from Russia and electricity from Transnistria, and this increases the uncertainty for Moldova. In this situation, we understand that our propaganda, they have very, very powerful leverage, saying, okay, Russia in any case could supply Moldova gas and provide electricity at the lower prices, but what could, for example, in this situation, our European partner do in order to support Moldova, and so on and so on. So all these instruments are used in this situation. After all, it's not clear what is to be expected in general from Russia. What is the final goal? What we understand, and this is extremely dangerous, is that Russian authorities, mainly President Putin, insist that Ukraine is anti-Russia. That's why Ukraine should be destroyed. And this is extremely concerning attitude. Most amazing is President Putin is quoting the UN Charter for justifying aggression. He quoted Article 51st, the right of countries to defense, but we understand who is the aggressor, who is defendant in this situation. And after all, he's quoting the Bible, John's Gospel, insisting that the aggression against Russia is a manifestation of love. And of course, this is very, very interesting, because church in Moldova is the institution which is enjoying the trust of about 80% of citizens of Moldova. And unfortunately, the Orthodox Church, Church of Moldova, part of Russian Church, refrain from condemning this aggression. And this is another source of concern. Of course, in this context, one of the major concerns for us is the eventual continuing depopulation of Moldova, because about 1/3 of Moldovans have Romanian citizenship. De facto, they are citizens of European Union, and we understand that the most skilled, educated, and competitive of them, as we call them, the pillars of democracy, they would probably prefer to emigrate, and this will be a factor which will undermine the further democratic development of Moldova. Now, the third part of my intervention, as was suggested, is about what could national, international actors do in order to revise probably their strategy for democracy support following the Russia wars in Ukraine. Here we know the situation is changing, and I would like to share with you and to remind you that European Union neighborhood policy, which was announced in 2002, by the way, exactly 20 years ago in March by former Foreign Minister of Great Britain, Jack Straw, and which was formalized in 2004, we understand that it became obsolete. So it's obvious that European Union neighborhood policy, which was sought to help to build a kind of security belt along the border of European Union, it doesn't work anymore. And this idea of an eventual buffer between European Union and Russia it didn't work anymore. From Moldova perspective, a new European Union stabilization project for Eastern Europe and South Caucasus could have a positive impact, similar to the stabilization and association process for the Western Balkans, which was launched in 2000 after the war in former Yugoslavia, and which provided this country with a clear perspective of accession to European Union. And we can see that for former Yugoslav Republic, which were involved in war, now step by step are finding themselves in the frame of European Union, and in fact they are finding themselves together, having the needed security protection and being involved in economic development. I consider that a new stabilization and association process eventually for Eastern Europe could be a very powerful incentive for strengthening democracy and reforming economy in this part of the world. And we saw the first signal that this perspective is a real one, because we know that Ukraine just send a request to be recognized a candidate country for European Union. Moldova did that, and as well Georgia. And I consider this is a correct, right way in order to try to save democracy in this part of the world. So these are the main items of my presentation. Thank you very much.
Igor, thank you very much. This exactly very pointed way addressed the questions we wanted to explore for this part of the discussion. I won't make any further remarks reflecting on what you just said. We can save that for later. I will now give the floor to the next speaker, now taking us to Georgia, Messina Khidashvili. She's currently as a chairperson for Georgian think tank, Civic Idea. Previously, Tina Tin was Georgia's Minister of Defense, the first woman in that post, and also has served as the Member of Parliament. She has championed important human rights and democracy reforms in Georgia for many years, which she in some ways led as the head of Georgia's leading civil society organization, Georgia's Young Lawyers Association. Tina, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Nana. Thank you to International Idea for first of all, having this discussion in these very difficult times for Georgia, for the region, and also for having me as a speaker here. It's an honor. Well, to answer your first question, which is about the effect on democracies of these three Eastern European countries by the war in Ukraine, from Georgia's perspective, I believe I need to start by outlining the state of affairs of Georgia before the war started, where we were in January 2022. What was the political, economic, geopolitical, strategic positioning of Georgia by the beginning of this year, how we saw ourselves developing in any direction, being it towards European Union, NATO, or any other ways one can imagine. So just to list some facts that how we've met, how Georgia met the war in Ukraine, those won't be very encouraging and not very promising. We have we were in a deep year-long political crisis in Georgia, beginning of this year, starting starting many years ago, but this last critical phase starting after the last parliamentary elections in fall 2020, when all opposition political parties refused to join the parliament and were in a 6-month boycott because of the fraud and large-scale manipulations, as the political parties claimed during the electoral process, which finally ended with a very significant for the development of Georgia political document called so-called Charles Michel Agreement. That was the final product of a months-long dialogue between the ruling party and entire political opposition, with the facilitation of the United States and European Union. On the final stages of that dialogue, we had President Charles Michel himself joining the process twice, by visiting Georgia, being part of those discussions, bringing parties together around the table, sending an envoy for a couple of weeks, working with the political groups, and at the end of it, in spring 2021, we ended up with President's initiated signature procedure of the, as I've already mentioned, so-called Charles Michel agreement amongst the political parties. At that moment, the largest opposition party, UNM, the formal ruling party of Georgia, refused to sign the agreement. But regardless of that, political opposition finally decided to enter the parliament. Later the year 2021, ruling party withdrew from the agreement. So that was another dark page of the Georgian democratic development in 2021, when the two largest political parties, former and current ruling parties of the country, withdrew, or they were joined in one case, the agreement that was seen by majority of the civil society here, the rest of the political parties, the rest of the players, stakeholders, is kind of way forward, the path to the solution of the political polarization that is killing the developments in this country for the last 2 decades, I would say. Other than that, we were advancing in all corruption indexes, unfortunately, particularly the perception, maybe not that much the factual basis, but the perception of Georgia going back to a deeply politically, particularly on an elite level, corrupt country is growing. It is shown in all the indexes and international ratings that were published in 2021 or beginning of this year. We had a serious problems with the economic development, low digits, high inflation, the Georgian currency deflating month after another. On international level, other than failing Charles Michel agreement and failing the promises given to the European Union, somehow my government managed to basically alienate all friends we had for the 30 years of our independence by making all kinds of derogatory and sometimes even politically or humanly very incorrect statements about the US congressmen, senators, European Parliament members, members of parliaments of various European Union countries, politicians, experts from all over the world, particularly from the European Union. Anybody of a different opinion about the policies of the Georgian government, critical of the policies of the Georgian government, was somehow marginalized by the Georgian government. And finally, regardless the fact that the current Georgian president was elected on a ruling party ticket, and she was supported by the majority, by the political majority. She was supported by the ruling party during the elections. We ended 2021 with a pretty clear signs of emerging conflict between the president and the ruling party as well. This is where we were when the war broke in Ukraine. Completely isolated, well, maybe not completely, but significantly isolated from the international agenda, having political, extremely violent political confrontation domestically, harsh economic crisis, and obviously COVID being part of our daily lives, and at the end of 2021 becoming strongest and worst of all times since it broke out all over the world. End of February, war started in Ukraine. Georgia unfortunately failed to be on the response level, I would say, as it was expected from it, or there was a perception Georgia would behave. For the entire month of November, December, Georgian parliament never found time to work on and vote on the several draft resolutions initiated by various opposition parties related to Ukraine, related to Georgia's European path, related to Georgia joining NATO, all sorts of issues that were high on the international agenda by the end of last year. And again, Georgian parliament never found time for discussion and voting on that. At the end of February, we finally managed to have a resolution passed about the Ukraine, never mentioning Russia at all. And once again, instead of bringing parties together and sort of calming down the situation and creating the atmosphere of unity, at least in the face of the war in Ukraine, we've managed to have a political process in the country, and particularly in parliament, that brought the parties apart from each other even more than they were before. We have unfortunate distancing of the government, not only from the political opposition, but also from the society, as the recent events in Georgia proved, all over the country, in different cities. We had hundreds of thousands of people on the streets permanently, every day, basically, protesting the war in Ukraine, protesting the policies of its own government. And I think Tbilisi was the only city in the entire world where you had massive demonstrations supporting Ukrainian cause, and no government representatives, including the city mayor, standing together with its own population with Ukrainian flags, protesting the war and supporting Ukraine on it. And finally on that, the crisis that I've mentioned that started at the end of last year between the president and the ruling party grew even deeper in the recent weeks. And I want to share with you a screen from today's foreign policy, where you have this article: Georgia threatens to sue its own president over her support for Ukraine. I think that this article, the title of this article best shows where we are at this moment and what kind of crisis we are in when it comes to the political discussion and understanding of the severity of the issues surrounding us. Not to go into the details, and I believe there will be lots of questions, so I want to leave as much room as possible for the discussion. Just to summarize our current state of affairs, it was already mentioned by our Moldovan colleagues, so I won't go in details about it, of Georgia applying for the membership to the European Union, along with Ukraine and Moldova. Although that process was pretty complicated as well, but I won't mention the details. The final positive fact of the matter is that finally Georgian government sent the application with a clear message that we are the country who still stays and remains on the path towards European integration. But at the same time, there is lots of skepticism in a country that it was basically the whole process of adapting the document and sending it to Brussels was pushed by the streets, by the demonstrations on the streets, and had nothing to do with the genuine desire and genuine aspirations of the national government. Again, going back to the Sharm el-Sheikh agreement, because there is a general overall belief, understanding, agreement in a country amongst all the stakeholders, except for the ruling party, that as long as we don't start pursuing the agreement concluded spring last year, changing our electoral legislation, changing the state of affairs of the judiciary in the country, bringing constitutional amendments to reality that were prescribed in the agreement. There is no real prospect and future for believing that Georgia is serious when it says that we wanna join European Union. And the biggest problem, and I finish with this, my country faces right now is that there is a broken trust from our international partners, being it bilateral or international organizations toward Georgia. There is no trust to a country which used to be a pretty big part of a various international coalitions fighting for freedom all over the world. There is no trust that we can be reliable partners. There is no trust that we can keep our word, and there is no trust that there is a real aspiration for democratic development of this country. The fact itself that the country is ruled by incomplete secrecy, no transparency to any dialogue, no transparency to any decision making, no transparency to any steps taken, for example, in case of Ukraine war by Georgia government, brings even more problems to a country than an opportunity for if we can use this word positive in any ways, looking at developments in Ukraine and death toll and all the tragedy that is happening in that country, if we can still use the word opportunity in terms of a little window opening at the European Union level, there is a strong belief in Tbilisi that Georgian government is going to miss that opportunity once again, as we did during other waves of expansion of the European Union. And this is all very well demonstrated in failure of all sides, I would say, to accomplish the goals of Sharm el-Sheikh agreements that is seen as a kind of factual demonstration of all the troubles that this country has. Thank you very much once again, and looking forward for the discussion.
Nathan, thank you so much, and we will return to some of the issues and some of the points you've raised in the discussion, and we'll communicate those questions to you. Let's now move to Armenia, to Lucina Hakobian. Lucina, also for the past 10 or more years, has been a prominent human rights defender and democracy advocate in Armenia and broadly in the region, within the Eastern Partnership Forum. She's and continues to lead a wide range of rule of law and free elections reforms. She's worked on and led reforms in freedom of assembly and association. She's also worked to ensure particularly the openness and transparency and the fairness in the selection of and appointment of public officials, including in the judiciary and investigative bodies in Armenia. Obviously, one of the large reform priorities that Armenia is facing. And she's also worked as an investigative journalist and has had a long-standing experience in strategic litigation to protect and uphold human rights in Armenia, including through the European Court of Human Rights. Lucina, the floor is yours. We're listening with a lot of attention.
Thank you, Nana, for this invitation to speak about the Armenian context and the implications of this terrible war for Armenia. I will also speak about the democracy situation in Armenia, and I will start with this with the period following the Velvet Revolution in 2018, and state that like everybody was pretty much happy with the pace of reform. Some really tangible progress was made in several areas, like the most auspicious of these was the 2 national elections held in 2018 and 2021, where according to all kind of relevant international assessments, the right to free and fair elections of Armenian citizens was ensured, despite quite problematic electoral legislation, which the government failed to reform twice in 2018 and also in 2021. But there was also slow progress in a number of other areas, such as police reform, anti-corruption, constitutional reform, reform of the bar, like very significant problems in the reform of the judiciary, and Armenia was assisted in its reform efforts again by, as is in the case of the other Eastern partners, by development partners, EU's individual member states, the US government, etc. And as in the case of Moldova, there is very strong criticism of such reforms, especially the reform of the judiciary by a very pro-Russian parliamentary opposition, composed mainly of the politicians from the former government. And many of them were charged for corruption crimes after the revolution, and they do have concerns that if judges and other officials with who they used to cooperate in the past are penalized in some form, or their powers are terminated, they will have to face quite severe problems, even bigger than they are facing today. Therefore, they are doing everything possible to get the power back, also resorting to all possible and even unimaginable means, also including talking about Armenia within a common union with Russia, and to clearly demonstrate their loyalty to Russia. Again, we had COVID-19 pandemic affecting the pace of Armenia's reform, but which was more important and more tragical, we had the war in Nagorno-Karabakh unleashed by Azerbaijan in 2020, and the defeat of the Armenian people in this war seriously affected the internal political situation, rendered Armenia more dependent on Russia, also seriously undermined the perception of Russia as Armenia's ally, which was eye-opening for the majority of the Armenian society, but Also, the West's stance of a silent observer, perhaps with the exception of France. The president of France was quite vocal in condemning these actions, like also seriously undermined the domestic perceptions of the West as the proponents of the democratic values, etc. So we are now in this situation that we are having all these struggles and all these feelings mixed in Armenia. And the war, as you all well know, stopped with Russia's mediation and the deployment of Russian peacekeeping contingent in and around Nagorno-Karabakh, which again, understandably increased Armenia's dependence on Russia. And at present, Russia is perceived, not very much admired, but perceived as the only force at the moment able to guarantee the existence of the Armenian people of Karabakh on their land. Also, in this post-revolutionary period, the role of other major players in the field, such as Turkey, for example, was not assessed properly in this country, and also after the revolution, and it is now with probably some hindsight that there are also some political experts starting to speak about the possible agreement between Turkey and Russia regarding the developments in Nagorno-Karabakh and also in Ukraine, whereby Turkey was allowed by Russia into the South Caucasus in return for Turkey's, as it were, neutral assistance to Putin's current plans in Ukraine. So at the moment, we're facing a situation with Armenians heavily disillusioned with Russia, but still believing that Russia's role is crucial for the security of Armenians in Armenia and in Nagorno-Karabakh, and also on the other hand, and the war in Ukraine is really very strongly condemned by the Armenian society, because we, having suffered from offensive wars, also one in the past, really have very strong understanding that war is not a means to solve any international problems, and we see this as a really attack on democracy, also Ukraine's democratically elected government. And this is very tragic and very condemnable. Also in this part of the world, and also in the light of Mr. Putin's one-hour speech and his regrets about the collapse of the Soviet Union, about the fact that the Soviet constitution had this clause which allowed exit of, and his regrets that there was this clause allowing exit of the Union republics from the Union, saying basically that this was nonsense and this should never have happened. We are very worried about the developments, in regard, first and foremost, to Armenia's independence and sovereignty if Russia gets what it wants in Ukraine. And also we had Lukashenko just sending the relevant messages, saying like, where do they have to go? So this is all really very worrying for the independence, the sovereignty, and the democratic developments in the country. Also, in addition to this, the war in Ukraine contributes to Azerbaijan's appetite for continuing its policy of ethnic cleansing of Artsakh. And since the start of the war in Ukraine, there have been some incidents also in Nagorno-Karabakh, with Azerbaijan preventing gas supply from Armenia to Nagorno-Karabakh, and also threatening the population of some of the villages in Nagorno-Karabakh with loudspeakers demanding that they leave these territories. And again, we see that Russia's victory, again, may be a sign for Azerbaijan that whichever country is stronger can get what they want, and this will serve as a really very negative example. The vulnerability for Armenia still remains the unresolved conflict of Nagorno-Karabakh, which has really severe implications for the internal democratic development, internal political situation, inhibiting democratic developments. And it is, we understand that following the war in 2020, this official Minsk group format somehow ceased to exist because it was handy to both Russia and Azerbaijan to expel the West from the region. But the fact is that this conflict remains unresolved, and the population, the Armenian population of Karabakh still feels insecure. So it is understandably, it will be hard to kind of restore this format, but we understand here that in the near future, it will not be possible to have any kind of security, etc., without Russia. Russia will not leave this region. So it is essential that our Western partners continue talking to Russia because this allows Armenia to have kind of more balanced approach in the resolution of the conflict, and also have hopes for increased attention to security threats in Armenia and to democratic progress in the country. And I will also stop here and be happy to answer any questions that may emerge. Thank you.
Lucinda, thank you so much. This gives us a very diverse in a way, but in many ways also a similar picture of the region vis-a-vis the situation and the prospect or the fate of democracy. I'd like to go back to the speakers in the same order we had you in your interventions, and first ask Igor. Igor, if you could perhaps help and elaborate. I think there's also some interest from the audience on the two things that were mentioned. One is, so you mentioned in a way the revised or revamped EU strategy towards the Eastern Partnership, and you mentioned the new stabilization project for this region. Well, of course, we can see what sort of terms and the new names of these policies emerge. However, maybe on the conceptual elements, what would you say such a new project would have to focus on? And of course, we understand these are multidisciplinary and there are a range of policies involved. But on the democracy and sort of internal democracy, resilience, strengthening part, what would you wish that such a new project would focus on? And then the second and related question, perhaps you also mentioned this ambivalent public, right? I mean, at least a relatively larger share of the public who has not been able to orient themselves and really is often changing their value positions also. What are the responses that one could see in support of this? Yeah. Those are questions from Igor, and I'll communicate others to the speakers later.
Yeah, thank you, Nana. So I like very much to answer such kind of questions, because I would like to remind everyone that European Union extended in waves, and we had, after the collapse of communist system in Europe, we have several, at least 3 waves of extension of European Union. And I would like to attract your attention and to ask you, could you say what would eventually happen if Poland, Czechia, Slovakia, Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria, and so on, what would eventually happen in this country if they would not have this perspective of European integration? I cannot answer this question, but I suppose that we eventually could have a mess there. Now, because we have this very successful history of extension of European Union in waves, and the latest I mentioned was for Balkans. Balkans was a very, very specific place. And we know historically why First World War started, because of Balkans tension and so on and so on. And look, after they had this war, civil war and so on and so on and so on, European Union with their strategy sent them a very strong message. And now these countries, step by step, could find themselves in this enlarged European community. They could restart their cooperation, their cultural ties, and so on and so on. For us, the message was very simple. In 2002, Romano Prodi, the president of European Commission, sent us, I mean former Soviet Republic, a message. We are ready to share with you everything but institutions. So for you, eventually, we'll have this association agreement, meaning that you are integrated more or less politically and economically, mainly economically, but not politically, with European Union. And the idea was for us very simple. Look, Moldova, Ukraine, and so on, they raise many headache for European Union because of any kind of criminal trafficking, human organ trafficking, small arms, drug, and so on and so on. And the message for us was very simple. European Union is ready to provide you a financial instrument and technical assistance in order to help you to share our values, but you'll remain there forever, if I can say so, meaning that this former Soviet space between Russia and European Union was to become a kind of, as Carl Bildt, former Minister of Foreign Affairs of Sweden, said, to be a space of common responsibility of Russia and of European Union. And Russia protested in 2009, and later on, we saw that Russia does not accept this approach. And we know what happened for us. On the eve of summit in Vilnius, where Moldova, Armenia, Georgia were to paraff the association agreement, and Ukraine was invited to sign the association agreement. Do you remember what happened then? Moldova was punished immediately, just because of the intention to paraff these documents, and the argument of President Putin was extremely strange. His message for us, for Moldova, was, oh, Moldova, you are a corrupted country, despite the fact that you just want to be closer to European Union. And if you sign association agreement with European Union and a free trade agreement, you will enjoy free trade agreement with Europe and with Russia, and you will present a kind of economic danger for Russia, because good quality goods from European Union, cheap goods from European Union will be without taxes imported to Moldova. You will change the label without added value and re-export on Russia, and you will undermine the economy of Russia. And our answer was, Mr. Putin, the volume of trade exchange of Russia with Moldova is 0.2% of all your commercial volume. How could we undermine your economy? And later on, we found out that the re-export in Russia was practiced by Belarus and Kazakhstan, the main part of Russia. We remember what happened to our friends from Armenia. President Putin invited President Sargsyan and told him, I just managed to sign an agreement with Azerbaijan, selling them arms for $1 billion. So if you sign or paraph this agreement with European Union, you'll have a problem of security. With Ukraine, we remember what happened. Mr. Putin invited Yanukovych. They have a discussion which lasted about 5 hours. Putin provided him a credit of $5 billion and convinced him to renounce to sign the association agreement. And this was a start of protest in Ukraine, and which culminated with dignity revolution. So we understand, and I am sharing with you all these facts in order to understand that this project of European Union concerning the association agreements, the space between Russia and European Union, the space of common responsibility and so on. What kind of common responsibility? Russia attacked Georgia in 2008. Russia attacked and confiscated Crimea in 2014. Now Russia attacked Ukraine directly. So we can see that this strategy of a belt of friends around European Union, this instrument does not work. And we have a good and positive example post-war situation in Western Balkan. And we understand that a good message for all of us, the fact that European Union agreed us, I mean, Ukraine, Georgia, and Moldova, to submit this application for becoming candidate for European integration. And in this context, we understand that the process will last a lot. So we need a strategy, and we need stages of integration, but for us it's extremely important to have the firm confirmation from the part of European Union that they will share with us eventually an institution, and step by step they will be implicated in helping our countries to do exactly what they helped Western Balkan countries to do. I see the single solution, this one, excuse me to be talkative, but I wanted as you invited me to elaborate my idea.
Thank you, Igor. Thank you so much. And obviously, these are very difficult times, and I think all one thinks and feels is talking and sharing. So of course we appreciate you putting out so much of your reflections on this. I'd like to go to Tina Tin with essentially the same question that you have now elaborated on. What should be the responses or the new approaches from the European Union to the region, if we can reflect a little bit on this?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think that most important issue at this moment, because of the war in Ukraine, because of the prolonged process of the integration, whatever stage of this integration we are at, it is absolutely critically important to see the political will from Brussels that there is an actual readiness, practical readiness of letting new states in that open door. This is a very popular sentence these days, but unfortunately, we are still there. The countries like Georgia, Moldova, Ukraine, we all need that. We need that strong vision, very clear vision from Brussels, which does not have that ambiguity in language that we've seen a couple of weeks ago in EVSA documents when, yes, there was a talk about the possibility of integration, but no, there was no sentence about the actual candidate country status or the process, how we will get to that candidate status. this double language or unclarity obviously complicates already complicated situations in our countries even more. Ukraine is at actual military cruel war at this moment. So in a way, it's much easier for them to see clearly how we are, under what terms their progress might be achieved. But Georgia and Moldova, regardless of Russian troops staying in our countries without against our will and against the sovereignty of our states, regardless of a very cruel war we experienced actually many times during these 30 years, and particularly in 2008. At this very moment, there is no war in our countries. There is no actual military fight. There is no actual, and unfortunately, I have a feeling, I might be wrong, but I have a feeling that there is no understanding of an actual threat and danger that we are facing on a daily basis because of everything what is happening in Ukraine. This whole idea of our fate being decided in Kiev is more of a political statement than an actual understanding by the people what it actually means and what the actual ingredients of this sentence are. And I believe that it is not that much understood in Brussels as well. Well, Brussels less, I would say more in main capitals of the member countries of the European Union. So number one, I would say, is the clarity of the messaging. Yes, we can have a long roadmap. We can have long and very complicated roadmap. This is perfectly fine. But at least we need to see that there is an end to the process, and we need to see that end. There should be a very clear agenda given to Georgia, Ukraine, and Moldova, actually specifically saying A, B, C, D, Z, what is it that is required from us? We know what is requested from us. We need to truly become democracies. We need to become the states who deserve to be members of the European Union. And only after that we can talk about the actual membership to the European Union. But we all know, and we are not naive to believe that those understandings are not necessarily formed based on the facts. And those beliefs are sometimes formed on the base of the propaganda, on the base of all the disinformation campaigns, mainstream, sometimes even mainstream media messaging in our countries that kind of diverts the attention of the people from important issues to the secondary matters. So that's why I would say number 1, 2, 3 priority for us is the clarity from Brussels, regardless of how strong the language is, regardless how difficult agenda will be, regardless the complicated manner of the issues we will be facing. This is not a problem. We need to do it. We know it's our homework, but again, because of all the growing skepticism and because of all the almost over actually a decade of non-responsive policies from the Brussels, from both sides of the Brussels, I would add here NATO and European Union. There is a very big, very high skepticism amongst the population that whatever we do, how hard we try, it's not going to happen. So we need to believe that it's going to happen. This will be my biggest request and biggest agenda point for the Brussels. Everything else is our homework. Everything else is to be done by us. Yes, we need support. Yes, we need to be pushed. Yes, we need to have democracy assistance, technical assistance programs running in our countries. But at the end of the day, we are the ones who need those things. The political will is to be coming from London, well, not London anymore, but from Berlin, from Paris, from Tallinn, Warsaw, Brussels. This is critically important. It strengthens pro-European forces. It makes our agenda stronger. It makes our voice stronger, and it does not leave that much room for the manipulation with the public opinion and manipulation with the feelings of the people, particularly in times like this, when people are actually dying and there is an easy argument formed that, oh, do you want to kill your kids for the ephemeric belief of joining NATO or European Union?
Thank you very much. I'd like to now go quickly to Lucine and ask her to reflect on rather the same question. One is, Lucine, where do you think Armenian democracy support coalition nationally, internationally should focus their efforts? And of course, if you can also very, very quickly, we have about 8 minutes before we have to close off, but at the same time, if there was a new sort of rethink of the EU's policy towards the region, where would you like to see the change or see the focus? And with this, I'd like to then prepare our discussion for closing, and just had extremely interesting various questions. One of them I would like to actually put out for very, very final remarks. I'd like to give each of the speakers later than 1 minute literally to reflect on this really important question. One of our viewers writes, despite all the darkness, what really shines in Ukraine right now is the strength of their institutions with citizens, government, military, etc., working together. What could Moldova, Georgia, Armenia learn from this? So that's that we will address in the very final remarks. Lucina, the floor is yours.
Okay, very briefly, democratic coalitions must really unite and be very strong about the reform agenda, and we need really the support of our international partners on this, because there is a lot of disinformation. I spoke about the propaganda and the very strong criticism from the former regime representatives to the reform agenda, but still we need to unite forces locally and internationally to achieve this democratic reform, because there is no alternative to this. And as regards EU's focus, I think Armenia has quite an ambitious agenda with the EU in the framework of SEPA, and I think that if EU keeps helping us to progress along SEPA obligations and guides us financially by advice and other means, that would be really great. Other than that, it would be really important for EU to also pay attention to the security threats of Armenia, because and especially now there is a strong feeling that the attention to Ukraine is much more than it was to Armenia, and it is now easier for EU to discern what is disinformation, what is not, whereas when Armenia was at war, there was this silent observer status, which much talks about it is difficult to find the truth from among disinformation. So a clearer stance would be very helpful, and a clearer position when there are security threats to Armenia. This much for now.
Thank you so much. Colleagues, before we conclude, and I'll try and share a few reflections on that, but would you like to, in the order of Igor, Tinatin, Lucine, take one minute and not more to reflect on some of these important institution building and resilience questions that come out from Ukraine?
Yeah, thank you, Nana. So, you know, I have friends who are involved in business, and they have a saying, and I would like to share with you this saying, because I consider this reflects the situation we have nowadays. They say like this: difficult times are rising strong leaders. Strong leaders are making or are helping us to to come the so-called shining times, and so on and so on. We have this dialectic revolves. So I would like to say that in this situation, and somebody mentioned in their question, Ukraine now is fighting for us, and Ukraine just help us to understand how important it is to have this language, strong language between the fighting nation and the strong leaders. And we, in order to protect our democratic situation, we should borrow this example from Ukraine, not, as I mentioned, so-called imitative democracy, just to borrow beautiful forms from the Western civilization and to say, oh, Moldovan constitution is like the French one, and so on and so on. We have a French type constitution, but it works in absolutely Moldovan way. So democratic institution, democracy, they deserve citizens, leaders of the country to fight together in order to make them stronger and to protect them. And this is my final message at the end of our today's discussion. Thank you.
Well, I think
Thank you.
it's sorry.
Tinatin,
I
please,
think
yes.
it's people thinking to believe that countries are capable, that are not otherwise capable of building united fronts against the enemies, will learn from the experiences and examples of others. Unfortunately, it does not work that way. We have our own experience, not very bad actually, from 2008, when during the war, regardless of, and who knows, Georgia knows how high were the feelings and how high was the polarization in summer 2008 in Georgia as well. But during the war, all political parties stood together. All the opposition parties said that this was not the time of the confrontation, and everybody should have sat together with the government and the president and worked together for the restoration of peace in Georgia. But unfortunately, once the war was over, this whole consolidation and unity was over. What we need to learn from all these times of war and peace, and then war again, and then peace again, is very simple, that we need to pay more attention to institution building when there is a time for that, because this is the only solution to the problems that we have. If we have stability of the institutions, then something that is most impressive for me from the war in Ukraine, how strong are the local mayors of every small and big city in Ukraine, how they hold, how they talk, how they fight. This is the best example, best scenario, best thing that I've learned from the war in Ukraine, and I hope my government also does, that a strong self-government is a solution by itself to many problems that we have. Yeah, I don't know whether we will learn the examples from our own or our friends' experiences, but at least we need to agree on one thing, that the Ukraine war taught all of us, and actually helped Georgian case a lot, that you don't need to provoke Russia in order to get the aggression and the war. You don't need to do anything, actually. If Kremlin decides, if Vladimir Putin decides, then there is a war. We just need to stand united and strong all together in order to respond with united fronts and pray for the better times when finally there will be those responsible for the atrocities and war crimes punished themselves, and the punishment will be exemplary for the others as well, that it will not happen in the future anymore.
Thank you, Tinatin, and Lucina, perhaps you could also take a moment to address
I
this.
think unity is really important. This is a lesson really, and again, the Armenian people can make these comparisons with the war back in 2020 and see like what was really lacking, the political forces conflicting and trying to abuse the situation rather than acting with a united front. So here we have a lot to learn. And also probably one thing that just keeps coming to my mind is about the previous narratives that resistance is about extremism, resistance is about nationalism, resistance is about radicalism. But here we see the example of Ukraine and everybody of us admiring the very strong resistance they are showing and defending their country. So I think this is also an important lesson for all of us.
Well, thank you so much to the panelists for really doing their best to, in some almost exhaustive ways, addressing the issues that we had put out on this discussion. Of course, our time is up, and I will certainly not even try to, and really impossible to summarize this vast range of issues into some kind of a cohesive list of bullet points or takeaways. But I think with this discussion, we have really moved closer to the objective that I think we and others have in this, which is the improving our collective understanding of the dynamics of state of democracy in these three countries, in which really this terrible war has befallen on this region. So what was the pre-existing context, and what challenges it has, well, new and old, has it brought with itself? Perhaps, you know, really as a final concluding thoughts, I would say three key takeaways I think stood out. One, of course, really the problematic and continued contestation between the pro-liberal democracy actors and well, their foes and opponents, either in the government or in the political landscape, really, as Igor, I think, described, and Tinatin also described in the case of Moldova and Georgia, and really the possibly the very strong and enduring effect that could have on the political stability and the ultimate survival and success of democracy in the region. Well, the second, I think that all the speakers have underpinned as the importance of really continuing to invest in strong, resilient democratic institutions. And I think Tinatin mentioned the importance of local government bodies that are able to stand and resist the pressures in a democratic, constitutional ways. And perhaps the third one that I think really was important and should continue to be in our thoughts and works is this perhaps the omnipresent factor of the role of the broader public. Igor mentioned this sort of ambivalent public sentiment, and I think other speakers also referred to this, and really what to do, and how to address that hanging question of what are the good strategies to really try and get the public more engaged and really closely engaged in following these developments and really promoting the democratic resilience in these countries. So again, thank you to our viewers, followers. I think we've had throughout the event about 120 external viewers who have contributed with questions. And please stay tuned. Please follow International Ideas upcoming other coverage. This will be roundtables and also our knowledge resources. We certainly hope to continue to stay in touch with our panelists and engage them in whatever work we will do in this immediate and really the coming period. Thank you to our interpreters. We've been very glad to have all the diverse languages available for our viewers. I think we can close the meeting with this, and thanks again for participation.
Thank you very much.
Thank
We
you.
look forward to being in touch.